everybody. In this video, we're going to talk about how to convert between percents, decimals, and fractions. So let's first talk about what a percent is. So the word percent means for each 100. So we talked a little bit in previous lessons about how the word per means for each. And then cent means 100. So for example, a century is 100 years, or you have 100 cents in a dollar. Or a centurion in Roman times was a army leader who would lead 100 men. Or a centipede technically doesn't have 100 legs, but they call it a centipede because it has a lot of legs. And so the word percent literally means for each 100. And this is how you convert percents to fractions, because if you have 25%, that basically means that you have 25 as a ratio with 100, because you have 25 for each 100. And that's how you can convert them into fractions. And sometimes the fractions can be reducible. Like in this case, 25 and 100 are both divisible by 25. So you could divide the top and bottom by 25, which would give you 1/4. So 25% equals 1/4. If you had something like 60%, well, that means that you have 60 out of 100. And when you reduce this, they're both divisible by 10, which would give you 6/10. And they're both divisible by 2, which would give you 3/5. And so the fraction 3/5 is equivalent to the percentage 60%. So whenever you want to convert a percentage into a fraction, you just take the percentage amount and put it over 100, because the word percent means for each 100. This is also how you can convert percents into decimals, because if you have 34%, this basically means 34 for each 100. And if you think about 34 divided by 100, well, that's 34 divided by 10 twice, because dividing by 100 is the same thing as dividing by 10 twice. And every time that you divide by 10, the place values get one place value smaller. So what this would equal would be 0.34. So essentially, a shortcut for this is you can take the decimal and move the decimal place over twice, because each time you're dividing by 10, you move the decimal over once. So to convert the percentage 72% into a decimal, you would basically move the decimal over twice, and you would get the decimal 0.72. And that's how you would convert a percent into a decimal. Now, if you want to go the other direction and you have a decimal that you want to express as a percent, well, you just need to take the amount you have and figure out how much you have for each 100, because percent means for each 100. So if you have 85 hundredths, well, we could think about that as a fraction, 85 over 100. And that would be the percentage 85%. So when you're converting decimals into percents, you basically move the decimal place over twice in the other direction, because you're figuring out how much you would have per 100. And this works even if you have a decimal that's longer or like has more place values than the hundredths place value. And so if you wanted to figure out what 0.477777 as a percentage would be, you would just move the decimal over twice, and you would see that 0.4777 repeating is 47.777 repeating percent, or in other words, that you have 47.7 repeating for every 100. And so that's how you would convert decimals into percents. If you want to convert fractions into percents, the easiest way to do it is to take the fraction and convert it into a decimal by dividing, and then convert that into a percent. So if I wanted to change 2/3 into a percent, I would say, okay, I'm going to do 2 divided by 3. Well, if I have 2 wholes, I don't have enough to split them up into 3 groups, so I'll have 0 wholes. But I could take each one of those wholes and split them up into tenths, which would give me 20 tenths. And if I take 20 tenths and split them up into 3 groups, I will have 6 tenths in each group. That will use up 18 of my tenths, leaving me with a remainder of 2 tenths. And I can split each of those 2 tenths up into hundredths. So I can think about bringing a 0 down. And if I have 20 hundredths divided into 3 groups, well, that will be 6 hundredths per group. That takes care of 18 of the hundredths, and you have 2 hundredths remaining. And you can see that this long division process is going to continue repeating regardless of how many decimal places we add. And so 2/3 equals the decimal 0.66666 repeating. And as a percentage, if I move the decimal over twice, that's going to equal 66.6 repeating percent. And so 2/3 as a percentage would be 66.6 repeating percent. Then you could do the same thing if you have 3/4, because you could take 3 and divide it by 4. So 4 doesn't go into 3, it goes in 0 times. But I could take those 3 wholes and make them into 30 tenths. And if I take 30 tenths and divide into 4 groups, the number of tenths that I could put in each group is 7. And when I do that, that uses up 28 of my tenths. And that leaves me with a remainder of 2 tenths, which I can exchange for 20 hundredths. And if I take my 20 hundredths and split it up into 4 groups, that gives me 5 hundredths in each group. And I can subtract those 20 hundredths that we used up. And in this case, since we don't have any remainders, this decimal would be a terminating decimal, and that would be the decimal that's equivalent to 3/4. So if I wanted to turn that into a percent, then I would move the decimal over twice, and I would get 75%. And so that's how you convert between percents, decimals, and fractions. If you guys have any questions, let me know, and I hope you have a great day.